Welcome back to the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe, back for another one. It's early June, well, getting to almost middle June now here, on June 11th, Thursday afternoon. OTAs in full swing, lots of news coming out, lots of fluff coming out, and with me this week, moved in, Mike Clay, the boss man. Mike, you're settling down there, but lots going on across the NFL right now.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a busy 2 weeks switching houses. You can see there's not much going on behind me right now as we set up the new place. But I'm happy. It's a new location here. I'm actually at my old house. I started working from home in December, so I was kind of like down in the proverbial mom's basement sort of setup where I had no sunlight or anything, just nerding out in the basement. But now I have some nice windows. I have a pool right outside the sliding door, so a lot better. I think I'll be thinking a little clearer now, so I'm looking forward to getting to work down here at the new house.
Yeah, no more dungeon situation there. Well, when somebody said, "Hey, get out of your mom's basement" to you on Twitter, you actually now you can say, "I'm not."
Right.
in my mom. So anyway,
I took that advice.
Right. I moving on up, right? So yeah, last week actually, Ross stepped in for you, the Thunder from Down Under, and as we were recording the show, we didn't actually get to it during the show, but news came out about Devante Parker, and that's where I wanted to lead off. Right now, he had foot surgery to replace a screw in his foot. It's not a major procedure, but he is given an 8 to 12 week timetable. Which now, looking at that, I mean, that puts him right up against the open of the season. And, this is fairly significant. A rookie coming into, new playbook, new system, and, actually turning some heads right there, at least initially, making Brett Grimes look a little foolish at times in practice. But now he's going to miss really most, if not all, of the offseason. And, I guess my question for you is sort of, how are you processing this, and do you see any value here? Because for me, I mean, now I'm not saying this is the same situation as what we saw last year, but there was a rookie who missed the beginning of the season and then set the world on fire. Now, I don't know if we're going to see Odell Beckham Jr. numbers out of Parker, but is there value to be had here in fantasy drafts?
Yeah, definitely. I've been taking him late in a lot of recent drafts. I've actually done 3 mocks the last 3 days, and in the last 2, I've taken Parker in the 10th and 11th round. I think he's a great stash, and you kind of touched on it. And we've been over this throughout the offseason, talking about replacement values. You see with Tom Brady, Todd Gurley, of course, Le'Veon Bell with the suspension, missed time, and Arian Foster is another good example. If you think a guy's going to miss some time, that's not automatically a death sentence. You shouldn't just take that guy off your board. As Odell Beckham proved last year, you can miss some time and still make a serious fantasy impact. So I think Parker, if there's a guy who resembles him the most in terms of situation, I mean, you look at it's a decent offense. He's clearly the top talent on the depth chart. Same thing with Jordan Matthews. We talked about this all offseason last year. Spend late round flyers on Jordan Matthews and Odell Beckham because they're the most talented wide receiver on their roster, and they're in a decent offense. I mean, both offenses were decent. Philadelphia and New York, same kind of situation here. Miami's not going to blow the doors off in terms of offensive production, but they should be around league average, a little above that. Decent quarterback. He's better than Landry, Jennings, Stills. As good as that group is, he's the best talent there. So, I think he's a great value pick right now because he is going to miss some time. So I wasn't upset when he got hurt. I mean, I was a little because I was already getting him as a flyer, but his ADP is just going to continue to fall as he misses time. So, I'm definitely going to have him on a lot of rosters, very much like I did Beckham last year.
Yeah, absolutely agree, 100%. And this is the player that you highlight. Now, the problem when you have a situation like this is you do have to sit on a guy potentially for a few weeks. And what we saw last year with Odell Beckham Jr., I mean, how many, I'd love to see the numbers on this. I don't know how you could ever figure this one out, but how many teams who drafted Odell Beckham Jr. actually had him when he started his historic run there? I don't even know where I would guess, but I would guess at least over half those teams dropped him by that point. So that's the drawback here is you kind of have to play the waiting game. But, if you were patient last year, You were patient with Odell Beckham Jr. You were patient with Jeremy Hill, another player who we didn't see really take off until the second half of the season when he was, absolutely electric, putting up league high rushing yards over that span of time. I guess that's sort of the key. We have this 1 week attention span so frequently in fantasy football, and really it's a season long. It's a marathon. It's not just a sprint. So exercising that patience with a player like Parker could pay dividends this season. Now, Mike, a couple other things coming out. We're going to talk about some mock draft stuff. Maybe hit on a little bit more. We talked about rookie drafts last week, so we might do that a little bit again now because a lot of people are in the thick of their rookie drafts. But before we get to that, this is the time of hype, right? And we've already talked about this. You and I talked about this 2 weeks ago. Players are getting hyped left and right, and we're continuing to see it. Now the question is, where do we believe the hype and where do we sort of, we don't believe it, right? And so two players that immediately stick out that we've seen in the news over the last couple of days. First, Ruben Randall. Randall, Eli Manning says, hey, he's going to have a breakout season in his fourth year. Randall was 35th in fantasy scoring last year, and he had 122 targets, Mike. That was 20th, tied for 20th in the league during the regular season. The other player is John Brown. And, John Brown entering his second season there with the Cardinals. Boy, oh boy, John Brown, very impressive when you actually go back and watch some of the games. He just really pops on film. He actually outscored Larry Fitzgerald for fantasy purposes last year. And, Mike, I know he's a personal favorite of yours. So I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on both of these players here since they're the two names who have stuck out in the last couple of days as we're really getting hyped.
Yeah, I think I got I did an ESPN standard mock today, 10-teamer, and I did get Brown towards the very end of that draft. I noticed in the last 2 days I did 2 PPR mocks, and Brown went a little earlier than that, than the final rounds. People kind of reacting to the news. I'm probably, I'm not going nuts here. I don't think he's going to put up wide receiver 3 numbers. Could he come in and have one of them T.Y. Hilton turnarounds where you just can't keep him on? You can't keep him off the field. He's just a guy that you have to get the football, and he emerges into a wide receiver 2, 3, borderline guy like that. It's possible, but they extended Larry Fitzgerald. He's making a lot of money. Fitzgerald's only, what is he, 32? I think he's 31 right now, so it's not like he's 38. The guy still has some time left. I still think he's going to be your every down possession guy. Then you have Mike Floyd, number 1 in average depth of the target last year. He's going to be their downfield threat. So, this is not an offense that's going to be among the league leaders in passing or touchdowns. They're going to try and rely on that defense as much as possible and certainly get the ball to Andre Ellington, who shockingly had, 250 touches last year almost in just 12 games. So, I'm not going crazy for the number 3 passing option in that game, but there is a little bit of intrigue there in the later rounds. Switching gears to Randall. He seemed like a cut and dry breakout last year. He got the targets. He just was not getting the end zone production. That the scoring production really killed him, and he was a little bit inefficient. I think there's still a little bit of hope. He is on the young side. But, with Randall, or with Odell Beckham there, of course, emerging as the superstar in the offense, and Victor Cruz will get his targets. Larry Donnell is going to steal some touchdowns. Corey Washington could come in the game and steal a touchdown or 3 during the season. They're gonna keep Shane Vereen busy. They have Rashad Jennings, Andre Williams, lots of weapons there. So again, not going too crazy with Randall. I think it's easy to get hyped about a guy who was kind of in his prime years, but who finished strong last year, but has been mostly mediocre throughout his career. So I'm not going too crazy with either of these guys, but I have no problem with either one towards the end of your draft. If I had to pick one, it would certainly be John Brown.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Because Randall may be in a slightly better situation, I think, for me. But Cruz's presence there certainly does put a damper on things. It's really close. It honestly is. Maybe Brown has a slightly higher ceiling for me, but I would see myself probably shading more towards Randall just because we did see that he was capable of putting up wide receiver 3 numbers in standard leagues last year. But one of the alarming things, though, as I just take a quick glance at his target count, Mike, over that stretch from week 12 on, he only topped double-digit targets once. That was in week 17. Other than that, his highest target total was week 16. That was 6 targets. Earlier in the season, he was seeing boatloads of targets, but once Beckham emerged, those numbers really decline pretty significantly, and that's a concern. That certainly is for fantasy purposes. Any other players sticking out to you that are, because again, every day we're seeing this player is the greatest. He's in great shape now, or he's totally recovered from the injury, or this surrounding cast is awesome. So players sticking out maybe that you believe in, or maybe that you don't believe in right now coming across the newswire.
Well, just kind of focusing on mock drafts, kind of players. I've been really good about tweeting out my results as I'm going through the drafts, and certainly when the draft's over, I post who I selected. So you kind of get a reaction from people. Like, how could you possibly pick this player, or how could you go this early, or wow, you got this guy late. My last two drafts, actually the last 3 days, I picked Bishop Sankey in all three drafts. And every time I've gotten probably a dozen responses each time from people saying, why would you even take him at all? I mean, took him in the 9th round, and that was a 12-teamer. Then another 12-teamer, I got him in the 11th. And then today in a 10-teamer, I took him in the 13th, right towards the end of the draft before my kicker and defense. He's a starting running back in the NFL. I mean, he's in his second year. He was the #1 drafted running back last year. He didn't jump off the page. He only had one run over 20 yards. He didn't have that explosive play. He doesn't have a long highlight reel from his rookie season, but his yards per carry was a little below average. His yards after contact rate was good. And again, we know he has that top end speed, and he's still a starting running back in the NFL in an offense that can only get better after what happened last season. So, 13th round, Jeff, 10th round, 11th round. I mean, how can you go wrong with the starting NFL back in his, entering his prime? I think that, this kind of has shades, and don't take this the wrong way. Just like we're not saying Parker's going to be a top 5 fantasy wide receiver like Beckham. I'm not saying Bishop Sankey's going to have this turnaround, but he has that feel like Le'Veon Bell last year. And we talked about he was supposed to be so good as a rookie. He had a ton of volume. He underwhelmed. He didn't have the big plays. Look how good, Bell got in year 2. So I think Sankey is kind of in that boat now. Not necessarily he's going to be a running back one, but he's just so drastically underrated right now that, he's well worth a late round flyer.
Yeah, I really wasn't thinking about Sankey, because in a lot of drafts at that point, I guess I'm probably, when I'm doing these mocks, I'm on, another position or whatever it may be, because I just pulled up his ADP. He's a 41st running back currently coming off the board. And looking at some of the names who are going ahead of him, Mike, Trey Mason, Charles Sims, and Doug Martin going ahead of him. Ryan Matthews going ahead of him. Devontae Freeman going ahead of him. And then one pick behind him is David Cobb. So this is a really interesting situation. And every spot where you got him was obviously of value then if his ADP is in round 9. Hey, you make a good point. Starting running back that late in the draft, it's hard to knock that sort of a pick at all. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying that he's a Le'Veon Bell comparison, but we know he did come into the league. It was the top running back drafted in that class. He came into the league with a really intriguing athletic ceiling and another year under his belt. I mean, he could certainly surprise. I'm just a little concerned. I guess, what's your overall outlook for the team with Mariota in there at quarterback?
Well, I think they're going to be better. Speaking of people who are getting hyped up, obviously Mariota is getting some positive reviews as well. So, I think the Titans offense will only improve. We know Kevin Wisenhunt in his career has wanted to throw the ball. So, you almost want to say it makes sense that they're going to lean on their running game, but I think they're going to pass the football with Mariota. I think that maybe that gives Sankey an opportunity to catch a couple footballs as well. So he doesn't necessarily have to be a 300-touch guy. He can just be efficient, score six. If he scores 6 touchdowns, this is probably a steal, in round 13 of the draft today. So, I think, again, and I'm not saying he's going to make that crazy emergence like Bell did last year into a superstar, but hey, last year, if I told you Le'Veon Bell was going to, perform up there with Matt Forte and Arian Foster and them, you'd probably say, well, that's ridiculous. He wasn't very good as a rookie. How is he going to do that in year 2? It's not crazy. The guy still is very young and can improve drastically. And there's already a little bit of chatter about that. Nothing crazy, but a little bit of chatter that he's doing better this year. Remember infamously last year his footwork was poor. So we'll see if he can improve in that. that area this year. But again, like you said, like I said, it's a late round flyer. The ceiling is obviously very high with him, and it's almost no risk. I mean, who are you going to take? Reggie Bush? He's another guy, that's being devalued right now. That's a good flyer late, but obviously he doesn't even have the ceiling of a guy like Bishop Sankey. So, I'll stop talking about Bishop Sankey right now because I might eat these words, by week 8 when he's struggling again and David Cobb's the lead back there. I think he's a fine flyer as well, but obviously Sankey right now looking like a really nice value.
Yeah, and the offensive line, it's not the offensive line that we would have seen out of the Titans maybe, a half dozen years ago or so when they were really a stellar offensive or run blocking unit, but they weren't terrible last year by any means. So I mean, it's not the worst situation. Certainly, always looking for value, and the thing is, we can critique anybody's 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th round pick. I mean, none of them are going to look fantastic. You're not getting superstar value in those rounds in most cases. You mentioned Reggie Bush. Boy, oh boy, this offensive line situation in San Francisco is really concerning right now. Essentially, the whole line is in shambles now following the recent retirement here of why am I blanking on his name?
Anthony Davis. Yep.
Anthony Davis. And Mike Iupati also out of the mix. 2 of their better run blockers last year. Cause for concern for Reggie Bush, for Carlos Hyde, or for you, are you downgrading these guys at all? Have you already downgraded them and it's not really an issue, or sort of what's going on here? And curious how they went in that mock that you participated in today.
Yeah, I mean, Reggie Bush was, I think Field Yates took him late in the draft. I had him in my queue. I've gotten Bush in a few of these mocks I've done. I think he's definitely undervalued, especially in PPR, because at the very least he's going to be busy on passing downs. But you also have a situation where if Carlos Hyde gets hurt or struggles, Reggie Bush, we know he's, in his career at times he's been a 3-down back. He can't handle that role. So, again, just like Sankey with less upside, you have Bush available in pretty much your last pick of the draft. He's probably going to be there. That's what I've seen recently. So I think he's a fine flyer because, if you do think the 49ers are going to struggle, you want to upgrade Bush because that means he's going to be out there a lot on passing downs. As for Hyde, I think I've dropped him a little bit, especially after they added Bush. But now with all this, just how the team's kind of falling apart, I think that hurts him a little bit. Fewer opportunities in the second half, less touchdown upside. That hurts a little bit. But at the same time, look at the film, look at the numbers. The guy was really good last year. He only had 95 touches, but he almost broke as many tackles as Frank Gore, who had 173 more carries. There's a lot to like about him. So I'm still buying on him as a mid-pack running back too, because you take I wouldn't say he has a high floor. He definitely has a low floor, but the ceiling I think with this guy is very high. He could be a first-round pick option next year. He just is that good, and at least in my opinion, I think he has that sort of upside.
Yeah, it is. The whole situation in San Francisco, it's a little strange, it's a little concerning. The retirements, obviously 3 retirements that were somewhat. Patrick Willis wasn't necessarily super early or anything like that, but Chris Borland, Anthony Davis, and then news that even Eric Reed had pondered it as a very young player as well. So it's a weird situation there, but again, we don't really care about that. We care about what fantasy value you can get, and I do agree, low floor, but especially, at the end of the season there too, Hyde had a very good game. I think it was was it 15? Was it the last game of the season for him? Either way, showing a lot of promise, and that's what you want to see out of those rookie running backs anyway, is the growth throughout the course of the season. And I think that, he's one of those players where his ADP is, where people are ranking him, I think it's just right. It's right in that 15, 16 running back range, and I think that's exactly where he should be going right now. Let's continue on this mock stuff though. Like, what else is sticking out to you right now? I know you said you've done a bunch of mocks. I mean, it's that time of year. It's June, so things are going to really start to ramp up. So, what else is sticking out to you? Any eye-opening things? Any of the comments from Twitter after you post those teams?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually taken a few different angles with these drafts. Not intentionally. You just look for the best value on the board. The one that I did 3 days ago, 12-team mock there, the scoring was a little bit more beneficial for quarterback. So I started with Gronkowski in round one, so you're almost at a disadvantage at your other positions if you start that way. You obviously have a superstar tight end. I'm all for it, but you really have to kind of dig deep from there. Came back with C.J. Anderson in round two. I went with a running back there instead of taking a top end wide receiver. I think there was only one wide receiver off the board at that point, so that was a bit risky there. But the reason I went with Anderson there is because he has running back number one overall upside. It's a little bit of a risky there, but early in round two, I think it was probably worth the gamble. But, then I come back with, and here's another guy, Jeff, who I've kind of taken a beating on selecting him, and that's Andre Ellington in round three. John Hansen last night in a mock, he did a very similar early round four. I think he took Ellington. He took him one pick before me. I was gonna pick him. So, Ellington, you worry about his effectiveness. He's not a young guy, even though he's only been around a couple of years. But he, as mentioned, he had a ton of touches last year in just 12 games. He would have been right up there with the leaders, especially in PPR, had he stayed healthy. I think I don't know what you think, but in PPR leagues, he has almost no competition. It's a decent offense. They've said he's going to be the feature back still. He's going to probably touch the ball almost 20 times a game right out of the gate. So it's just a matter of staying healthy. We've talked about getting hurt's not as a big a deal as people make it seem. You can afford to miss some action and still be a fantasy force. We saw that from Arian Foster, top 5 running back last year. And he's obviously going to get that boost in PPR because he's going to see a lot of targets. So, I think he's another guy who's very undervalued right now.
Yeah, I do like him, and I think that in some senses we see this a lot of times with fantasy owners. You get burned. You're sort of that scorned lover by certain fantasy for certain players in the league, and Ellington could be that for some people because of the hype train that existed around him last year. And obviously playing, he wasn't healthy the whole season. Now they're saying he is healthy. We know this guy. We go 2 seasons ago and look at him play. When he's healthy, he's electric. He has that game-breaking potential ability. And, Mike, there's a lot of hype surrounding David Johnson right now. And it's pretty interesting. He's obviously a small school guy, very athletic, entering into that depth chart, and in some ways has a similar skill set. I don't know if he's as dynamic as Ellington is, but a similar skill set. But, of course, he's had to work his way up through, starting out as the number 4 back as OTAs opened up. But I see him. I don't see him as somebody who's going to supplant Ellington this season. He's more insurance in case something happens to Ellington more than anything. So I wouldn't be too concerned there. I know some people have been concerned about Johnson.
I don't think he is major competition there. I almost get a Marcel Reese feel or a Mike Tolbert feel from him than I do a feature back at the NFL level. I know initially you thought, okay, maybe he steals some targets, and I think he will. I think he's going to, I don't think Ellington's going to see quite the role he did last year on passing downs, but it's still a significant one, but not. I think he was seeing like 20% of the targets at times, which is an obscenely large number. That's Matt Forte territory. So I think he'll help out there. But, Marcel Reese usually sees like 10% of the targets in Oakland. I think that's kind of what you're going to see from, or even DeAnthony Thomas, a little different dynamic, but same kind of situation, kind of a gadget guy that comes in and they design some plays for him. He sees, 9-10% of the target. So that's kind of what I see for him. If Ellington gets hurt, different story. Very much like we saw with Reese at times when McFadden went down in Oakland, he was called in to be a feature sort of player. So we'll see about Johnson. I'm a little pessimistic about him being a long-term fantasy asset, but obviously there's some value there from a handcuff perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. But really, that's all it's going to be, and it's not going to move my take on Ellington whatsoever. And again, last year too, we this is a situation with Ellington where we heard Bruce Arians wants to get him the ball. He wants to put the ball in his hand. The talk of the crazy amount of touches that they were throwing out there is a little bit outlandish, but we did see a significant amount of touches, and we could certainly see that again this year. And when you take that approach, when you're going potentially a Gronkowski, or if somehow you go wide receiver early, you're going to need to get some running backs. And as deep as people are saying running back is this year in mock drafts, my experience, it's not as deep as people think it is. Yes, you can scoop value at certain points, but you can get shut out of running back really quickly as well. So, you need to scoop some value. You need to get a player who's going to be a starting running back, and Ellington is that player right there. And you're getting him consistently, I'm sure, in the third. And you said Hansen got him in the fourth round. So, I mean, that's good value right there.
Yeah, it's some guys. There's just some guys, and it. Jason Witten's probably a good example. Another guy I was going to get to who's very undervalued this year, who people just got a little bit stung. He was underwhelming last year, but guys like that, like Ellington, like Witten, maybe Vincent Jackson's another good example for this year. Eric Decker, Larry Fitzgerald, Roddy White.
Eric Decker, I have to stop you on. It's criminal where Eric Decker is going in drafts right now. I wrote about this in my column the other day. I'm sorry to interject, but number 48 wide receiver going off the board is absolute insanity. So, hopefully this doesn't change too much so I can get him in all my leagues, but it's crazy where he's going. Sorry, Mike.
No, I'm with you there. I took him in round 7 recently, and he's on my bench in a PPR I did 2 nights ago. I got him in the 8th round. But my point, and another example, Frank Gore during his Niner years, the last couple of years, he hated to pick these sort of guys that I'm talking about because they're boring, but they get the dirty points. It doesn't matter how Ellington gets it done. If he catches 5 balls every week, that's 5 points in PPR, plus the yardage, plus, the 15 carries he's getting and the occasional touchdown. So sometimes these guys aren't overly exciting, but, if they become a value, go for it. I mean, you want guys that can, like Odell Beckham's, guys that can be superstars and get you to a championship, especially if you're in high stakes leagues. But, if guys keep, trickling down the ADP, go get them. It doesn't matter how the points are coming. If they're going to score, the points, go get them. And another example there is when, people say, should I have 2 receivers from the same team? If they're 2 good receivers, yeah. I mean, if guy's going to score 200 points and a guy's going to score 190, don't take the guy with 190 because he's on a different team. If he's going to, take Emmanuel Sanders over T.Y. Hilton if you think he's better, even if you have Demaryius Thomas. Now, the draft I did 3 nights ago, the one I was just talking about with C.J. Anderson and them, I went Andrew Luck in round 4 because it was a premium scoring league for quarterback, so I felt that was a little bit of a value there. So if you've been following along, I took Gronk, Luck, Anderson, Ellington in the first 4 rounds. Obviously, that leaves me a little bit it gives me a problem at wide receiver, especially in PPR. So I ended up going for discount veterans. I got Vincent Jackson, Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, Larry Fitzgerald, and then I had Anquan Bolden as well, and some young guys on the bench. So interesting strategy there. I can't say I'm overly excited about the wide receivers. I think Vincent Jackson, top 10 in targets last year, only scored 2 touchdowns. He's a rebound candidate. I'm good there. But do you want to be starting, Jeff? Do you want to be starting 2 receivers on the Jets? Jason Lockett-Ford today said Geno Smith's probably going to get 8 games. I don't think he will because he's not very good, and Ryan Fitzpatrick's underrated. But I have to admit a little concern having Marshall and Decker. That's not the same exactly as Emmanuel Sanders and of course Demaryius Thomas.
Yeah, that's a little dicey. I actually was in a mock about a week ago where I took Marshall, probably in a similar spot to where you took him, and then it came back around and I just kept looking at Decker and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this to myself. But I mean, in this situation, hey, if Geno is the quarterback, I mean, Decker still did all right last year, still put up over 900 yards. I mean, it was a respectable season, and he was a little banged up throughout the course of the season. But, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he was better than Geno Smith was last year. He's shown over the course of his career. He's not an elite level quarterback. He's a middle of the pack quarterback, but he's a capable starting quarterback. And he's a player who actually, like I said, I just wrote up the Jets and my team depth chart review. It's a team preview series, so check it out on Pro Football Focus when you get a chance. But with Chan Gailey, here's his fantasy finishes too. 17th in 2012, 11th in 2011, 17th in 2010. Geno Smith last season was 26th. And, I just can't see how they keep giving this guy an opportunity. But then again, I'm not a football coach nor general manager or anything like that. But if Fitzpatrick's in there, Mike, we saw it last year. We saw the ceiling. We saw what he could do with some good receivers, DeAndre Hopkins and Andre Johnson there, and we saw him put up a 6-touchdown game. So the ceiling is much, much higher with Fitzpatrick, and I would definitely like having 2 Jets receivers in that case. a whole lot more if Fitzpatrick was in at quarterback.
Yeah, definitely. I've talked about that before. I mean, Fitzpatrick got benched last year and he was doing pretty well. I mean, he just had a couple bad plays mixed in there right before he got benched, and they just threw in the towel. It was a mistake by them. I think they should have kept riding with him. It would have helped out that offense. But I think he's either going to win that job hands down, or he'll be in there by week 4 after Geno comes out and tosses 4 picks in the first half of a game. So I think their bye's week 5, and our projections show Fitzpatrick in there as of week 6. So we'll see what develops there. But for that team's sake, it is only a mock, but for that team's sake, with Marshall and Decker, certainly you're hoping that Fitzgerald gets the job. Switching gears, I mentioned I've done a couple mocks. I think it's kind of interesting. You can always just follow along here and see what someone's thinking and see what's available. And I've done this kind of article in the past, maximize your starting lineup, where you almost go backward. Say, all right, I know I can get really good tight ends in round 10 and quarterbacks in round 8. So I'm not going to focus there. I'm going to make sure I have my 2 or 3 running backs by week 5 or round 5, because I know there's nothing there after. So it's always an interesting strategy to look at what could have been in your draft. So yesterday, 12-team PPR mock. I picked at the turn. Actually, I picked 10th. I took Julio Jones at 10, and Calvin Johnson came back to me in the round 2 turn. As interesting as that is, it gets better when I get to my next team from today. So I started with Jones and Calvin. Obviously, that leaves me at my hands a little tight at running back. But I came back and got Frank Gore and Mark Ingram. I was happy with that. Some people still are down on Ingram. Gore, obviously, with the Colts connection there, that's pretty solid. But I'm a big Ingram fan. I think he's underrated and in a great offense. Number 1 in rushing OTD last year, Jeff. So obviously, scoring opportunity is there. So that's 4 picks off the board. I get 2 running backs, 2 receivers. Came back with TJ Yeldon, who I like a lot.
Yeah, actually, I want to stop at Yeldon real quick, because I was in a mock where I took him as my 2nd running back. And I got harassed on Twitter by a number of people. Now, this was about 2 weeks ago, and now we've heard more of the news cycle coming out that he's really looking like the starter, 3-down potential, all of that. But I wanted to get your thoughts on him, because I'm a supporter. I'm going to go back to this over and over again. I would rather have him over Tevin Coleman in a redraft or in a dynasty league. And Coleman, to me, has a little bit of Sankey to him last year. Everybody was on the Sankey train, but nobody watched the guy play in college. Nobody really considered anything. It's just because a few people said Sankey's the top running back. Okay, then he's the top running back. Now a few people are saying Coleman's going to be good in this system, but is he really? How many people are watching this guy play last year or throughout his college career? So for me, Yeldon, I'm a big supporter, and obviously you taking him, you are, but sort of what's your thought process with him?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think very much like a Dorial Green Beckham. I think that Coleman's probably one of them high ceiling, extremely low floor guys. So we'll see what develops there. But I'm with you on Yeldon. I mean, I think we need to pull up that clip from about a month ago when we were talking about Yeldon, because I was taking him in MFL 10s a while ago. A month ago, he was extremely undervalued. He was just a flex or a bench running back in all my leagues, because he was just falling to the 6th, 7th, 8th round. But I talked about on our show that his ADP was going to go up. It was just inevitable. The stories were going to start coming out that he was going to be an every down back. And sure enough, that's happening now. He's getting a little tougher to get. I've seen some people reaching on him as well. But, I was able to get him in the flex here. I'm happy with that. I mean, usually a PPR league, you want a wide receiver in your flex. If it's a 2 wide receiver league in a flex, you definitely do. If it's a 3, you have a little more leeway there, which is why I went Yeldon in the 5th round. But, normally you want to go with a wide receiver. So I took Yeldon there in the 5th. I came back with Vincent Jackson in the 6th. I've already talked about why I like him. Matt Ryan in the 7th. Just, there's a couple options there. I think I had Romo was on the board too. That gets my quarterback there. I probably could have waited a little later. When I came up again, Brady was still there. I wasn't too happy about that, having taken Ryan in round 7, but still get a solid quarterback, and I have the Jones-Ryan connection there as well. And then I just followed with Eric Decker. Still got Jason Witten in round 9. I talked about him. He's been, I think it's 11 straight years, Jeff, that he's been a top 11 fantasy tight end. He dropped around to 9th last year. he's gonna, a little bad luck in touchdowns. If he would score 1 or 2 more touchdowns, he'd be a little, getting a little bit more attention. But he's a steal right now in late rounds. He's a mid-pack tight end one option. He'll do it dirty like we talked about, but he's going to get the numbers. So I like him a lot. And then I rounded out with guys like Devante Parker, Bishop Sankey I mentioned, your kicker, your defense, Reggie Bush. You just throwing darts there at the end of the drafts. But, I thought that was an interesting draft to talk about because, I went wide receiver heavy right out of the gate there, but I still waited at tight end and quarterback and was still able to get Gore and Ingram at running back. So it's an interesting strategy.
Yeah, I like if you're going to take that wide receiver heavy approach initially, I do like going that route, especially Gore. Ingram's interesting. Now, Ross and I did talk about Ingram on the show last week, talking about Spiller and the Spiller hype. Potentially Spiller could out-touch Ingram. I'm not necessarily backing that perspective, but I like Ingram. I've been an Ingram supporter from day one, and even endured those painful years where it didn't really work out too well. So it's an interesting way to construct a team, and I think that's a good lesson for some people if you're not really comfortable going that wide receiver route. Basically the approach you're taking here, you went wide receiver, you went a little bit solid higher floor running backs, and then later on you go high ceiling running backs, right? So swing for the fences a little bit there as you get deeper into the draft. So I do like that approach. Mike, I want to pause for a second here because we do have to mention our sponsors as we get deeper into the show here. Before I forget about it, and of course our sponsor, DraftKings. And, DraftKings, it's year-round daily fantasy sports. Right now, baseball season is in full swing. Huge cash prizes being handed out every single day at DraftKings.com. And they're the official fantasy sports partner of Major League Baseball. Daily means no season-long commitments. You don't have to worry about that at all. You can win big tonight. It's a new season every single time you play. You're not stuck with injured players. You don't have to work the waiver wire. Any poor performances, you get over it the next day. Simply pick 2 pitchers, 8 positional players, and stay under the salary cap, and you can win huge cash prizes just like our man Peter Jennings did last year when he won $1 million playing fantasy baseball at DraftKings.com. Hundreds of thousands of fantasy sports fans just like you have cashed in at DraftKings. Now it's your turn. Hurry up over to DraftKings.com. Use the promo code PFF to play for free to win part of $300 million being paid out this baseball season. DraftKings.com, the official partner of Major League Baseball. Use that promo code PFF for free entry right now at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com. All right, Mike. Commercial out of the way. Actually, somebody tweeted apparently loving our commercial segment from last week. We were talking about the NCAA content that we're going to be offering this year, which, by the way, I mean, that if you play daily, and I'm sorry to go on the commercial here and to just do this as an aside, but Wes Huber's columns are probably, if you play daily college, are going to be worth the price of a subscription alone. The stuff that he's been putting out right now on the site, if you haven't read it yet, even if you don't play, even if you're just like mildly interested in college football, read them. It's player profiles for every fantasy relevant player in college football, which is an insane amount, and it's going to be continuing to go throughout the course of the summer. Right now, he's starting the ACC. Just put up the ACC quarterbacks today. Awesome stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wes doing a great job there with the college stuff. So if you play, like you said, if you play college fantasy, I tried that once in a head-to-head league, which was kind of fun a few years ago, but haven't really gotten into to the daily landscape yet. I think Case Keenum was my quarterback the last time I played some college fantasy football. But yeah, let's keep moving on. I'm liking this kind of mock talk. It's kind of interesting. So today we did ESPN staff mock, non-PPR, 10-teamer, so keep that in mind. But I really like how this team went. So if you're doing that ESPN standard of 10 teams, 2 wide receivers, and a flex kind of format, I like the angle I took on this, so I definitely recommend it. And what's interesting is I picked first overall here. So I took Adrian Peterson first overall. It doesn't really matter who you take. I mean, obviously I'm pushing Peterson, Bell, but if you prefer Lynch, Charles, whoever, you could still utilize the strategy. So coming all the way back, and again, this is the reaction on Twitter. This was hilarious, but I picked it at the end of round 2, obviously, and then the first pick in round 3. I got Julio Jones and Calvin Johnson, who I got, or I had to take a lot earlier in the draft I just mentioned. But, it's kind of shocking they fell. But if you look who's coming off the board, Jeff, we've talked about this. There's pretty much a top 23 this year, Gronkowski, and then the top 11 running backs, the top 11 wide receivers. So right at the end there, Jones and Johnson fell for whatever reason, was able to snag those two up. Came back and got Frank Gore as my number 2 back to go with Peterson. And then I followed with TJ Yeldon as my flex. Again, it's a standard, so you're perfectly fine getting a quality running back in that flex spot. Round 6. Now we're talking about the bench. Run 2 running backs, 2 receivers, flex. You're already talking about the bench here, unless you go tight end, quarterback. But as I'll get to, you can wait. So I go Amari Cooper. So I get some serious wide receiver talent on the bench there. Come back with Travis Kelce in round 7, which I kind of regretted because Martellus Bennett, ladies and gentlemen, falling like a rock right now, an absolute steal. You can get him after the 100th pick. It's crazy. So I definitely recommend eyeing him in drafts. 8th round, Trey Mason, get some running back depth there. 9th round, Michael Floyd, another wide receiver, a 4th receiver before I even take the quarterback. Round 10. I missed the 99th pick was Tom Brady. That's what I wanted. I took Romo 100th in round 10. So my starting line is Romo, Peterson, Gore, Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson, Travis Kelce, TJ Yeldon. With my benches, Mason, Sankey, Cooper, Floyd, Devante Parker, John Brown, Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, a 10-team league, if you can come away with that, you're sitting pretty. You have 2 running back ones. You have 2 top 5 fantasy receivers. You have a top 3 tight end. You have probably a top 7-8 quarterback, and we'll say a running back too in Yeldon at flex with a ton of ability there, and Cooper, Floyd, those kind of guys on the bench. So I'm happy, Jeff. What do you think?
No, I do. I really like that team, and I like how it worked out there. Getting that first pick overall, especially in 12-teamers. I had the first pick overall in our staff mock, and for me, that's the worst spot to be in a 12-team league or anything larger than a 12-team league because, like you just mentioned, there are 23 players who you want. And so if you're with smart drafters like we were with the staff mock, all of them are going to be gone by your next pick, right? So you're in a tough situation. But, for you, in that league, yeah, absolutely works out really well. You still get those wide receivers. And, it's interesting when you say Bennett. He's a player who, we talked about tight end before, and he's sort of right past that lip of the huge plateau of tight ends. So, to be able to get him later on, to be able to get somebody like Jason Witten later on, does show a strategy or potential for strategy there where you can really wait at that position and load up. Although I do like where you got Kelce. Would you say 7th round?
Seventh round.
Yeah, I think that's fair given his ceiling. Maybe he doesn't have a Gronkowski ceiling, but would it absolutely floor me at the end of the season if Kelce outscores Jimmy Graham? No, not at all. I mean, you could certainly be the number 2 scoring tight end at the end of the season, and getting him in the 7th round is great value.
Yeah, speaking of Graham, I mean, I think he's terribly overrated right now. I mean, his ADP sunk after the trade, but now it's going back up. You're seeing some pundits out there who, are a fan of him, think he's going to be fine. I'm not one of them. I think that I still have him number 2, but he's not even in the vicinity of Gronkowski. I have him 40-some points ahead of him. I think he's in that tier with Kelce, Olsen, and Bennett. And that's why I won't take Graham. He's going way too early. You've seen him go in the 3rd, 4th round. When Bennett, as I mentioned, you can get him after pick 100. I mean, that's 11th round in 10-teamers. That's absurd value. Olsen, I think he's going around 6 or 7. Kelce, obviously, I mentioned I just got him in 7. Probably need to go 6 to get him in 12-teamers. They're all together. They're all within 10, 15 points of each other. There's no reason to be reaching on Graham when you can get guys like Kelce, Olsen, Bennett that much later. And then we already mentioned Gates and Witten and those kind of guys. Jordan Cameron went undrafted today, I think, in the ESPN mock, or was extremely late. Larry Donnell definitely went undrafted. Delaney Walker, there's just so many guys in there. I didn't even mention Antonio Gates, and he scored more points than Jimmy Graham last year. So, there's just too many options there. And Jimmy Graham, he's going to be 2 touchdown reliant. He's only going to see a handful of targets a game. Relative to New Orleans, of course, it's just not the same sort of offense. So, I do have concerns. I think he should be the number 2 tight end, but he's just going way too early for my liking.
Yeah, 3rd round, 304 is his current ADP. Kelsey's in the mid-fifth, Olsen late fifth, Julius Thomas late sixth. Not crazy about that one at all. One that really sticks out to me, I just quickly pulled up the ADP. Josh Hill is the ninth tight end coming off the board. He is coming off the board before Zach Ertz. To me, that's a problem. I get it. I understand why people are kind of excited about him. Yeah, he showed a little bit last year, but to expect anything even remotely close to what you got out of Jimmy Graham, I think is a huge stretch. He's not that kind of dynamic athlete that Graham is. More to me, he's more of a catch and fall down guy. Whereas somebody like Ertz, boy, oh boy, I mean, in this offense, some have suggested he might lead the team in receiving. I don't think he's going to lead the team in receiving, but he's got a massive ceiling in that offense, and I'd much rather take a stab at that than Hill in what's really a revamped New Orleans offense.
Yeah, definitely. And they also have had Jermaine Gresham in. He's hurt, so that's why they haven't signed him yet. He could easily be signed and steal some looks there. And Tim Wright was cut today. I mean, I kind of joked on Twitter, maybe a future Roto World blurb will say, Tim Wright working out for the Saints. So, I don't think they're done at the tight end position. I think they're going to have some bodies there. And, Hill has scored a lot of touchdowns, but he's been used primarily as a blocker in that offense. So, they say he'll take over that role, but it's obviously not going to be at that same capacity as Jimmy Graham. So, we'll see what develops there. But you're right. Hill going a little too early. Most of the experts drafts I've been in, he's gone pretty late where you're like, okay, I'm comfortable. Everyone's just going high ceiling there. But, I prefer a guy like Austin Seferian-Jenkins. I think, he's going to play every down, and he has that high ceiling. He has a way higher ceiling than Hill. He's better. And that offense, the jury's out on Winston, but, I think that offense should be better than it was last year with McCown and obviously Mike Glennon. Then Donnell Walker, Cameron, we mentioned those guys should also be going ahead of Hill.
Yeah, and even somebody like potentially Kyle Rudolph in an offense that could be vastly improved over last year. Eric Ebron, another player really disappointing in year one, but how many years do we actually see a tight end, a rookie tight end perform, to meet that sort of expectation? He's going to take a leap in year two. He's in an offense that can, sling the rock around the field. So he's another player.
I'm not really with you there. I mean, you're not wrong in that he could get a lot better and improve, and it's not a bad situation, but I don't think he's very good. I don't like coming in, and I just don't think he's going to be one of them guys that pans out. If you have to pick, you go down the rankings and say, okay, here's a bunch of young guys, this one's going to bust. I think it's probably him. I'm just not a fan. I'd rather Amaro. I'd rather Seferian-Jenkins. Tyler Eifert even is right there. I think he has a shot to step forward. So, I get what you're saying. Certainly in a deeper league with deeper benches, you want to take a flyer on a guy like that. But, I think, if I'm picking in a redraft, I'm probably taking Vernon Davis before him. I think Davis has a nice chance to rebound this year, especially if the Niners have to pass the ball more.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I'm just saying, for me, again, the approach that I'm taking really is I'm trying to get my hands on one of those top 5 tight ends. And then if I don't, then I'm really going after some of those players like you mentioned, Witten, Gates. I really like to get my hands on Ertz. And then from there, if I'm taking a backup guy, which sometimes I don't, sometimes I do, depends on how the strategy works out, I'm swinging for high ceiling, and I still do believe Ebron has high ceiling. Now, granted, he's got a low floor too, but the thing about him is, I think to have an expendable tight end, it's not the worst thing in the world. So taking a stab on his ceiling, especially if a lot of those other players are off the board, Seferian-Jenkins I would prioritize over him. Amaro, I talked about him in my column the other day. So, but I guess we'll agree to disagree on this one. Hopefully I'm right, because I do have him on a couple dynasty teams. But lots going on in terms of mock drafts. Mike, we're running out of time here, but we do actually have our staff rookie draft going here, and it's in the midst. I'm actually on the clock as we speak, but I did want to just briefly touch on this very quickly because, hey, we've been talking about rookies so much here, and so far it looks like both of us have only had one pick, so this won't take very long at all. I picked at the end of round 1. You picked at 205. So for me, I'll hit with my pick first. I was hoping that somebody would have reached Somebody may have, grabbed Jameis Winston or something like that. But instead, it went chalk. The first 11 players that I had ranked came off the board. So I was in a really interesting position. I was looking at some of the running backs. I was looking potentially at Duke Johnson. Not really crazy about the situation. I do have a lot of running backs on this team. So I went with Max Williams. And it's sort of for this very same reason here we're talking about. There's very few tight ends at the top end. And for me, I don't have a tight end on this team. My incumbent best tight end is Dwayne Allen. That's just not going to cut it, especially for the long term. So I went and grabbed a tight end, which I rarely ever do in these sorts of drafts. But for me, it was really a need issue. And he was right there in my rankings, right at this sort of back end of, or sort of the borderline of round one. So I went that route. I don't know if you fault the pick, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
No, I'm fine with it. I'd probably be tempted by Duke Johnson. Actually, in the hyperactive league I'm in, I picked I think it was 111 and then 113, something like that, and I got Duke Johnson and Max Williams. So I'm with you with those. Considering those guys at that spot, that's right about where you picked there. I picked at 17th overall. Actually, I struggled a little bit last year. My team's fallen apart ever since the Aaron Hernandez debacle. Ever since that, and my team was so good when all that happened. Ever since then, I've been struggling. But anyway, I was supposed to pick mid first round. I traded that in a pretty gigantic deal with Sean Siegel. It's pretty much his draft. He's selected 6 times in this one: Aguilar, Perriman, Green Beckham, Tevin Coleman, Jalen Strong, and Devin Funches so far. So he's going with the size aspect at wide receiver. Can't fault him there. So I picked 17th overall. I went Philip Dorsett. What was I looking at there? I was not impressed by the running backs. David Johnson, David Cobb, I think really stood out as the options. Not in love with them. And the 2 quarterbacks were there. Wide receiver was a bit underwhelming. Otherwise, I want to say underwhelming. There was options there, but I took the best guy on my board. As much as I like guys like Devin Smith and Tyler Lockett, I think Philip Dorsett in Indy the ceiling there's too high. The situation's great. I think he's well ahead of Dante Moncrief already, despite people still picking Moncrief for whatever reason. I think Dorsett's clearly their number 3 option there. And, of course, you took Max Williams, so no options at the tight end position. So I'm happy with Dorsett at 17. I don't pick till the 5th round, Jeff, so I'm going to be bored for a while.
Well, we'll have that to talk about next week, at least my picks. I'm gonna leave everybody hanging on this. I'm not going to make it live on the show. But I will say that in the Sirius XM draft Ross and I talked about last week, I took Dorsett in the 2nd round as well. I took him at the 22nd pick overall, which for me I thought was a steal. Now, both leagues have IDP included. However, the PFF staff league that we're in right now, no IDPs off the board yet. There are some guys, obviously, I think are going to be going pretty soon here. I won't say any names just yet, but I do like the Dorsett pick. I'm right there with you. I think he's actually slightly undervalued at where he's going in a lot of rookie drafts right now. So for me, can't fault that pick whatsoever. Kind of was hoping he was going to fall because that would have made my pick a whole lot easier. But anyway, we're running over time here, so we're going to cut the show now. We'll be back next week, though. We'll talk, like I said, a little bit about the remainder of this rookie draft, maybe some other things and whatever news happens. So make sure you're following Mike on Twitter at Mike Clay NFL. I'm at Jeff Ratcliffe. Make sure that you're also following the site at PFF_fantasy and at PFF Radio. You can listen to us on Stitcher, on iTunes, on Blog Talk Radio. You can watch us on YouTube and the Fantasy Sports Network. So for Pro Football Focus, he's Mike, I'm Jeff, and that's a wrap.